The motorcade didn't slow down for anyone. Ever. 3 black Mercedes-Benz S-Class vehicles cut through the gridlocked streets of Gangnam like a blade through silk, unhurried, untouchable, absolute. Pedestrians stepped back before they even registered why. Street merchants yanked their carts sideways. Even the traffic officers on duty found reasons to look elsewhere. Because in Seoul, when those particular plates appeared in your rearview mirror, you didn't wait to be asked to move. You simply moved. Everyone knew what those cars meant. Everyone except her. The plastic cart appeared from a side alley, loaded with fruit juices, brightly colored cups, and snack bags, its little wheels rattling over the uneven tarmac with no apology whatsoever. She stepped right into the lane with both hands on the handlebar, head down, earphones in, completely unaware, or perhaps completely unbothered, that she had just blocked $1 billion convoy in the middle of one of the most dangerous intersections in the city. The lead car braked. The second. The third. For 4 full seconds, nothing moved. Then the rear door of the middle vehicle swung open. He didn't wait for his security. Shin Jinn stepped out into the heat himself, 6 feet of controlled fury in a charcoal suit that cost more than most men in that district earned in a year. His jaw was set. His eyes were cold. He moved through the frozen crowd the way a storm moves through open field, everything around him going still before he even arrived. She still hadn't looked up. He closed the distance between them in 5 steps and gripped her arm just above the elbow, firm, not brutal, the way a man grips something he has already decided belongs in a different place. She looked up. And she didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She didn't go pale. She didn't shrink. She looked directly into the face that made grown men in tailored suits lose the ability to form sentences, and she frowned. Not in fear. In the specific, exhausted irritation of a woman who had already had a very long day and was not interested in adding this to it. "Excuse me," she said, in accented Korean that clearly wasn't her first language. "You're the one blocking traffic." Somewhere behind Jin, one of his security detail made a sound that might have been a swallowed cough. Jin said nothing. He simply stood there, the most feared man in a 50-kilometer radius, held in place not by her grip, but by something he couldn't immediately name. Something that had nothing to do with the traffic and everything to do with the way she looked at him like he was simply a man. Just a man. Inconveniencing her Tuesday. Something shifted behind his eyes. Something old and locked and very, very quiet. He let go of her arm. "Welcome to Mafia Moonlight Tales, besties. If this opening already has your heart doing things, please hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss a chapter, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, and share this with someone who loves a story where the most powerful man in the room meets the one person completely unimpressed by him. Now let's get into it. Now, before we go any further, you need to understand exactly who these 2 people are, because this story only hits the way it's supposed to hit when you know what each of them is carrying. The man in that charcoal suit. His name is Shin Jinn. 34 years old. Sole heir to the Shin Syndicate, one of the oldest and most powerful criminal organizations in South Korea, with financial interests stretching from Seoul's luxury real estate market into underground operations across East Asia. To the outside world, he is the CEO of Shin Capital Group. To those who know better, he is simply called Jeju. The seat of authority. He is precise, economical with his words, and has not smiled in a photograph since he was 9 years old. His mother has placed 3 highly pedigreed women before him in the past year alone, daughters of rival families, political dynasties, old money. He has refused each one without explanation. Not from cruelty, but from something harder to articulate, a bone-deep refusal to live a life that was written for him before he was old enough to read. He is not a man without feeling. He is a man who learned very early that feeling was a liability. And so he buried it somewhere deep, and built a city on top of it. And the woman with the cart? Her name is Noa Blackwood. 28 years old. Originally from Atlanta, Georgia. She has been living in Seoul for 2 years on a work visa that she renews with the meticulous care of someone who understands exactly how much is riding on it. She holds a business degree she has not yet had the resources to properly use. That cart, stocked with fresh fruit juices, imported American candies, and homemade lemonade, is not a dream deferred. It is a strategy. Every dollar she makes goes toward her younger brother Caleb's medical school fees back in the States. She wakes at 4:30 in the morning to prep her stock. She is on the street by 7 a.m. She smiles at every customer, remembers their orders, and has quietly built a small but fiercely loyal clientele right there in the Gangnam district. She is not naive. She has been moved on by officers, harassed by competing vendors, and spoken over more times than she can count. She has developed, out of sheer necessity, the ability to hold her ground without raising her voice. Which is exactly why, when a man in a $10,000 suit grabbed her arm in the middle of a Wednesday morning, she looked him dead in the eye, and told him he was the problem. She had absolutely no idea who he was. He was about to find out exactly who she was. And neither of them would ever be the same again. 3 days before the traffic stop, Shin Jinn sat at the head of a dining table long enough to seat a small government and said nothing for 11 minutes straight. His mother sat at the opposite end, spine perfectly vertical, hands folded over an untouched cup of tea. Shin Yuna had not raised her son to be sentimental. She had raised him to be strategic. And strategy, she had decided, required a wife. The first woman entered the room at exactly 7 p.m. Her name was Park Saran. 29. Daughter of the Park pharmaceutical dynasty. She moved with the careful grace of someone who had been trained since childhood to be looked at, chin lifted, shoulders back, a smile that was polished to a shine and revealed absolutely nothing underneath it. She was, by every measurable standard, flawless. Jin looked at her the way he looked at quarterly financial reports. Thorough. Unmoved. Final. No. His mother's jaw tightened so slightly that only someone who had known her for 34 years would have caught it. She set down her teacup without a sound and gestured toward the door. Saran exited. The smile never wavered. Jin almost respected her for that. The second woman was the daughter of a sitting congressman. Elegant, well-spoken, clearly intelligent. She and Jin exchanged exactly 4 sentences. She laughed at something he said that wasn't a joke, the reflexive laugh of someone performing rather than responding, and something behind Jin's eyes went very flat. No. The third woman didn't even make it past the appetizers. She made the mistake of asking Jin what he liked about his work. He told her the truth, that he found most of it tedious and most of the people in it predictable. She nodded enthusiastically and said she felt exactly the same way. She had no idea what he did for a living. No. After she left, the dining room was very quiet. Shin Yuna looked at her son for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was the temperature of marble. You are 34 years old, Jin. The council is watching. The succession requires. I know what it requires. Then act like it. He didn't answer. He reached for his glass, took a slow sip of water, and stared at the middle distance in the way he always did when a conversation was over but the other person hadn't realized it yet. His mother left the room first. She always did, lately. Jin sat alone at the long table for a while after that, his suit jacket still perfectly pressed, his expression unreadable. The house staff moved around him like water around a stone, careful, quiet, practiced in the art of invisibility that his household required. He should have been thinking about Saran's family connections, or the congressman's political reach, or any one of the very logical reasons his mother's shortlist made complete sense on paper. Instead, he was thinking about a gray t-shirt. About a patterned headband wrapped around natural hair, catching the afternoon light on a crowded Gangnam street. About a woman who looked up at him, and didn't rearrange her face into something more convenient. Who held her ground on a plastic cart with the same energy he held a boardroom. Who told him, without flinching, that he was the one in the wrong. He hadn't been told he was wrong in a very long time. He wasn't even sure he disagreed. Jin set down his glass and stared at the empty chairs where 3 perfect, approved, utterly forgettable women had sat. Then he straightened his cuffs, stood up, and walked out of the dining room without calling his mother back. He had somewhere to be in the morning. He came back in a plain car. Not the motorcade. Not the charcoal suit. A slate gray sedan with no plates worth recognizing, and a dark jacket over a simple black shirt, the closest thing to ordinary that a man like Shin Jinn could physically manage. He'd left his security detail 2 blocks away with instructions that were short and non-negotiable. They didn't like it. They never liked it. He didn't particularly care. He found the cart at the same corner. Same rattling wheels. Same riot of colored cups lined up in cheerful, chaotic rows. Same patterned headband. She was mid-transaction when he arrived, counting change into the palm of an elderly man with the focused patience of someone who had learned that every customer deserved the same care regardless of how long the line behind them was getting. The old man shuffled away with his juice. She looked up. She recognized him immediately. Her expression didn't exactly warm up. "You," she said. It wasn't a greeting. "Me," Jin agreed. She studied him for a moment, the plain jacket, the absence of the convoy, the fact that he was standing on a public street corner like a regular human being, and something in her face shifted from wary to merely guarded. She crossed her arms. "You here to move me again?" "I'm here to buy juice." A pause. "How many?" He looked at the cart. Did a quiet calculation that had nothing to do with thirst and everything to do with mathematics, specifically, how many units of product it would take to justify 10 uninterrupted minutes of conversation without it being strange. "All of them," he said. Noa Blackwood stared at him. "I have 500 cups." "I'm aware." She didn't move for a moment. Then she reached under the cart, pulled out her little handwritten price board, and held it up so he could see it clearly, the way someone holds up evidence. Like she was giving him one last chance to come to his senses. He didn't take it. What followed was the most efficient transaction of Noah's 2 years on that street corner. Jin transferred the full amount from his phone without blinking. Noah stood very still for a moment after she saw the number land in her account, recalibrated whatever she had assumed about this man, and then, because she was nothing if not professional, began processing the order. She didn't have bags for 500 cups. He told her to keep them. She told him that was absurd. He agreed with her, completely unbothered. They talked while she worked. Not about anything significant, at first. She asked what he planned to do with 500 fruit slushies. He said he'd figure it out. She told him that was a terrible answer. He said most of his answers were. She almost smiled. Almost. He asked how long she'd been on this corner. 2 years, she told him. He asked if she'd chosen this district specifically. She glanced at him sideways, the look of someone deciding how much to give, and then said yes. High foot traffic, business professionals, consistent demand. She'd mapped 3 different corners before settling on this one. Jin said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, not as a compliment, but as a simple statement of fact, that's a solid market entry strategy. Noah stopped what she was doing and looked at him properly for the first time. Not with the guarded suspicion of the traffic stop or the professional wariness of the transaction. With something more direct than both. "Who are you?" she asked. He looked back at her evenly. "Someone buying juice." She didn't push. But she filed it away, he could see that she did. Noa Blackwood was the kind of woman who collected information quietly and said nothing until she knew exactly what to do with it. He found that deeply, unexpectedly interesting. He came back the next morning. Same corner. Same plain car. He bought everything again. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. Noa was prepping her cart in the back room of the small convenience store whose owner let her use the space each morning in exchange for a cut of her Tuesday sales. The television on the shelf was on, as it always was, a Korean news channel she half followed, half ignored while her hands worked through the routine of slicing, pouring, and sealing. She wasn't paying attention until she was. The news anchor's tone shifted, that specific drop in register that journalists use when a story has weight, and the cheering at the bottom of the screen assembled itself into a headline she read twice before her hands went still. Shin Capital Group confirms acquisition of 4 district properties, Shin Jinn tightens hold on Gangnam corridor. The footage that followed was from some kind of public business forum. Polished room. Polished people. And there, at the center of a long table, in a charcoal suit with his jaw set and his eyes cold and utterly unbothered by the cameras pointed at him. The man who had bought 500 juices 2 mornings in a row. Noa set down her knife. The segment was only 90 seconds long, but by the time it ended she had heard enough. Shin Jinn. 34. CEO of Shin Capital Group. And beneath the clean corporate headline, spoken in the careful language of journalists who understood exactly where the line was, deeply connected to the Shin family organization. Influential across industries. Not a man whose business you stumbled into accidentally and walked away from cleanly. She was on her corner by 7:15 a.m. She was ready for him by 7:30. He arrived at 7:42 in the same slate gray sedan. Same plain jacket. He was reaching into his pocket for his phone, presumably to transfer another payment that made no logical sense, when she held up one hand. Don't. He stopped. I know who you are, Noa said. Her voice was even. She had spent the 40 minutes between the news segment and his arrival deciding exactly how this conversation would go, and she intended to stick to the plan. I saw the news. Shin Jinn. Shin capital. All of it. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it either. He just looked at her with that flat, patient expression that she was beginning to understand wasn't coldness exactly, it was the look of a man who had learned to wait people out. She didn't give him the chance. I need you to stop coming here. Something moved briefly across his face. Gone before she could name it. I have a work visa, she continued, and her voice stayed steady because she had practiced this part specifically. I have a vendor's permit. I have a brother in medical school whose fees are due in 6 weeks. Everything I have built on this corner, I built carefully and legally, and I cannot afford the kind of attention that follows a man like you. I can't. The street moved around them, commuters, car horns, the ordinary noise of a Gangnam morning, and Jin stood in the middle of it, listening. Actually listening. Not in the performative way of men who wait for their turn to speak, but in the focused, absorbing way of someone processing information they intend to use. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Your brother, he said finally. Medical school. That's not the point I was making. I know, he said. I'm making a different one. He looked at her for a long moment, at the cart, at the permit she kept laminated and clipped to the side rail, at her hands still resting on the handlebar. Then he took a single step back. I'll see you tomorrow, Noa. He got back in the car before she could respond. She stared at the space where he'd been standing and felt, with a sinking clarity, that telling Shin Jinn to stay away and Shin Jinn actually staying away were two entirely different things. She said no 3 times before she said yes. The first no was immediate and instinctive, the kind that comes from the stomach before the brain has finished processing the question. The second was calmer, more reasoned, a list of practical objections delivered with the precision of someone who had thought them through. The third was quieter, and Jin recognized it for what it was, not a refusal, but a door she hadn't decided to open yet. He waited. Then he said, simply, I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to walk into a room. She went home that night and stared at the one dress she owned that wasn't work clothes. She wore it Friday. The gala was held in a private hall in Gangnam that didn't advertise its own existence, the kind of venue that operated entirely on invitation and old money. Black marble floors. Chandeliers that cost more than Noah's annual rent. Waitstaff who moved with the rehearsed invisibility of people paid to be furniture. Jin met her at the entrance in a black suit that made every other suit in the room look like it was apologizing for itself. He looked at her dress, deep burgundy, simple, nothing like what surrounded them, and something in his expression settled. You look like yourself, he said. Noah wasn't sure why that landed harder than a compliment would have. He walked her in with his hand resting at the small of her back, light, not possessive, and the room did what rooms full of powerful people always do when something unexpected enters. It went still. Then it started talking. She felt the stares before she could identify their sources. She found them quickly enough. 3 women stood at separate points around the room, positioned with the deliberate spacing of people who had not arrived together but were very much operating in concert. Noah recognized 2 of them vaguely, from the periphery of that first traffic stop, elegant figures half visible behind tinted glass. Now, up close, they had names. Park Saran in ivory silk, standing near the bar with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The congressman's daughter in emerald green, watching Noah over the rim of a champagne flute with the focused attention of someone doing rapid calculations. And a third woman Noah hadn't seen before, older-looking, sharper-edged, in black that was clearly deliberate, who didn't bother disguising her assessment at all. These were the women Jin had refused. And they knew exactly who Noah was. She could feel it, the specific temperature of a room in which several people have already discussed you before you arrived. Jin steered her toward a cluster of elders near the center of the room, his posture straight, his expression unreadable, performing the version of himself this room expected with the ease of someone who had been doing it since childhood. He introduced her without apology or excessive explanation. Noa Blackwood. My guest. Not a title. Not a qualifier. Just her name, stated like a fact that required no defense. One of the elder men, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, looked at Noa with a gaze that catalogued and dismissed her in the same motion. Then he looked at Jin with an expression that was asking a question Jin showed no interest in answering. Later, when they stepped briefly onto the hall's private terrace, Noa exhaled slowly and turned to him. They hate me, she said. Not distressed. Just accurate. Some of them, Jin agreed. The women especially. Yes. She looked through the glass at the three figures still tracking their location with elegant, practiced indifference. Jin. She said his name plainly, the way she said most things. What exactly are you doing? He looked at her for a long moment, at the city lights catching the burgundy of her dress, at the complete absence of performance in her face. Choosing, he said quietly. The word sat between them like something newly placed and not yet fully understood. Inside, Park Saran set down her champagne glass with a soft, deliberate click. The morning started like every other. 4:30 a.m. alarm. Cold water on her face. The quiet ritual of prepping stock in the convenience store back room while Seoul assembled itself outside. Noa moved through the routine the way she always did, methodically, efficiently, with the particular focus of someone who understood that discipline was the only thing standing between her and the thing she was working toward. By 7 a.m. the cart was on the corner. By 7:15 she had her first 3 customers. She didn't notice anything wrong until mid-morning. A woman she didn't recognize stopped at the cart, well-dressed, unhurried, the kind of person who didn't typically browse street carts with genuine interest. She asked about the lemonade. Noa explained the ingredients. The woman listened with a polite smile, purchased nothing, and left. Noa watched her go with a faint unease she couldn't immediately name. She named it 40 minutes later when 2 police officers rounded the corner walking with the deliberate, destination-specific pace that meant they already knew where they were going. They were going to her. Miss Blackwood. The taller officer held up a badge with the practiced neutrality of someone performing a procedure. We've received a report. We need to inspect your cart. Inspect it for what? He didn't answer. The second officer was already moving around the side of the cart with gloved hands, lifting the insulated panels beneath the stock trays, reaching into the spaces where Noa kept her permit documents and her daily float. She watched him the way she watched everything she couldn't control, completely still on the outside, every nerve in her body awake and firing. His hand came out holding a cloth pouch she had never seen before in her life. It was small. Dark blue. Drawn shut with a silk cord. The officer opened it carefully, and what caught the morning light was old and gold and clearly, unmistakably, the kind of object that belonged in a private collection rather than a street vendor's storage compartment. A hair comb. Ornate. Antique. Engraved along the spine with a family mark Noa didn't recognize but somehow already knew she should be afraid of. That is not mine, she said. Her voice stayed level. Miss, I'm going to need you to step away from the cart. I said that is not mine. I have never seen that before. Someone put that there. The second officer found 2 more pieces before he finished. A small jade pendant on a broken chain. A ring, heavy and signet-stamped, wrapped in tissue paper as though someone had packed it quickly and deliberately. A small crowd had gathered, the way crowds always gather around disruption, quietly and quickly and with phones already raised. Noa stood in the center of it, her cart surrounded, her permit completely irrelevant to what was currently happening, and understood with cold and absolute clarity that this had been planned. Not improvised. Planned. Down to the timing, down to the cloth pouch, down to the woman with the polite smile who had come to check that everything was in place. The tall officer was reading her rights in Korean when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at it. A message from a number she'd only saved 3 days ago. Don't say anything else. I'm coming. She looked up from the screen at the officers, at the crowd, at the heirlooms laid out on top of her cart like an accusation assembled by someone who had never had to worry about what an accusation could cost. She thought about Caleb's fees. About her visa. About 2 years of 4:30 a.m. mornings dissolving on a street corner in front of strangers' cameras. She put her phone back in her pocket. She said nothing. And she waited. The detention room was small and fluorescent and smelled like recycled air and old decisions. Noa sat with her hands folded on the metal table, her back straight, her face arranged into the careful neutrality she had learned was the only safe expression for a foreign black woman in a room where people had already decided what they were looking at. She had given her statement twice. She had asked for consular notification once. She had not cried, not because she didn't want to, but because she understood instinctively that tears in this room would be recorded as guilt rather than fear. The heirlooms, she had been informed, belonged to the Shin family estate. She closed her eyes briefly when they told her that. Then she opened them and said nothing. Jinn arrived at the precinct in 11 minutes. Not in the plain sedan. The motorcade. All 3 cars, plates visible, pulling up to the entrance with the particular energy of a statement being made before anyone had spoken a word. His security detail moved with him through the lobby. The desk sergeant stood up before Jinn reached the counter. He asked to see her. They told him she was being processed. He asked to speak to the precinct chief. The chief appeared within 4 minutes. Jinn was in the middle of a quiet, controlled conversation about jurisdiction and evidence procedure when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His jaw set. He stepped away from the chief and answered. His mother's voice was unhurried. Almost gentle. Which meant she had been waiting for this moment and had decided exactly how it would go. I assume you're at the station, Shin Yuna said. You assumed correctly. Then you already know the heirlooms are registered to our estate. Which means the filing is legitimate. Which means the girl's visa status becomes a matter for immigration, not just local police. A pause, short, surgical. This can all be resolved very quietly, Jinn. One conversation. That's all it requires. He already knew what conversation she meant. Saran's father called this morning, she continued. The Park family is willing to move past your earlier reluctance. The arrangement would be announced within the month. Clean. Straightforward. Another pause. The charges against Miss Blackwood would be dropped by this evening. Her vendor license would be reinstated. Her visa would be flagged as reviewed and cleared. She would never know the difference. The lobby hummed around him, officers, paperwork, the ordinary machinery of consequence running its course. And if I say no, Jinn said. Then the filing proceeds. Immigration follows. And a young woman with a work visa and no family connections in this country finds out very quickly how little protection a vendor's permit actually provides. His mother's voice stayed perfectly even throughout. I'm not asking you to be cruel, Jinn. I'm asking you to be practical. These are the same things sometimes. He stood very still. Through the window of the interview room visible from where he stood, small, rectangular, set high in the wall, he could just see the top of Noah's head. The patterned headband. Perfectly upright. Waiting. He thought about what she had told him on the rooftop. The 4:30 a.m. mornings. Caleb's fees. 2 years of careful, deliberate construction, corner by corner, customer by customer, built on the specific hope that discipline and honesty were enough to protect a person. He thought about how wrong she had been. How wrong he had let her be. I'll call you back, he said. Jinn. He ended the call. He stood there for a moment longer, looking at the window, at the headband, at the particular stillness of a woman who was holding herself together through sheer force of will in a room designed to make people fall apart. Then he turned back toward the precinct chief. He had a different conversation in mind entirely. The precinct chief was a careful man. Careful men, Jinn had learned, responded to one thing above all else, the precise, well-timed understanding that the cost of standing in someone's way had just exceeded the cost of stepping aside. He spoke to the chief for 6 minutes. Quietly. Without threats, because threats were for men who lacked better tools. He spoke in the language of facts, specific, documented, irrefutable facts, delivered in the tone of someone who had already decided how this ended and was extending the courtesy of an explanation before it did. Then he made 3 phone calls. The first was to his private legal counsel, who had been on retainer for 11 years and answered on the first ring regardless of the hour. Jinn gave him 4 instructions. The lawyer asked no questions. He never did. The second call was to a former intelligence contact, a man who owed Jin a debt that had been sitting uncollected for 2 years, the kind of debt both parties understood would one day arrive unannounced. Today was the day. Jin told him what he needed. Surveillance records. Entry logs from the gala venue. Footage from the street corner covering a 40-minute window on the morning of the arrest. The contact said he would have it within the hour. He had it in 40 minutes. The third call was the one that cost him something. He called Chairman Beck, the eldest member of the Shin Council, 71 years old, the man who had placed Jin's father's seal in his hands at 17, and told him that the weight of a name was either a burden or a weapon depending on who was carrying it. Jin had not called him directly in 3 years. Protocol required requests to move through channels, through intermediaries, through the careful architecture of hierarchy that kept the council's structure intact. Jin bypassed all of it. Chairman. A long pause on the other end. This is irregular, Jin. Yes, Jin said. I need an hour of council time. Tonight. In person. Your mother has already. I know what my mother has arranged. I'm asking for an hour before it becomes permanent. He paused. I have documentation of a frame-up conducted using Shin estate property without council authorization. If that becomes public through any channel other than this one, the reputational damage lands on the family name. Not on me. Not on the woman in that detention room. On the name. The silence that followed was the sound of a careful man doing rapid calculations. 7 o'clock, Chairman Beck said. The council chamber was older than most of the men seated in it. Dark wood. Low light. The kind of room that had absorbed decades of decisions and showed it. Jin stood at the head of the table, his mother's seat, technically, which was not lost on anyone present, and laid out everything. The surveillance footage showing Park Saran's personal assistant entering the street vendor district at 6:40 a.m., 1 hour before the police report was filed. The gala entry logs placing all 3 rejected brides in a private anteroom together for 22 minutes the night Noa attended. The testimony of 2 precinct officers, already provided to legal counsel, confirming that the complaint had arrived pre-written rather than verbally reported. He presented it without emotion. Without theater. The way his father had taught him, let the facts perform, and stand still while they do. When he finished, the room was very quiet. His mother sat 3 seats down, her hands folded, her face composed into something unreadable. She did not look at him. He did not look away from her. Chairman Beck spoke first. The filing will be withdrawn. Tonight, Jin said. Not a question. Tonight. Jin gathered his documents. The park arrangement is also withdrawn. Permanently. He looked around the table, at each face, slowly, the way his father had taught him that too. I will marry when I choose. Who I choose. The council will be informed, not consulted. He left the chamber without waiting for a response. In the corridor outside, for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, he felt the particular quiet of a man who had finally said the true thing out loud. It felt, unexpectedly, like breathing. The resignation letter took him 4 drafts. Not because he didn't know what he wanted to say, but because he had spent 34 years speaking in the language of power, indirect, layered, weaponized, and this required something different. Something plain. He sat at his desk at 2 in the morning on a Thursday, the city quiet outside the floor-to-ceiling glass, and wrote the final version by hand on paper that had no letterhead. Just words. His words. Stating simply that Shin Jinn was relinquishing his role as acting head of the Shin Syndicate, effective immediately, and transitioning all associated operational authority to the council's designated successor committee. He signed it without ceremony. Then he wrote a second letter, longer, more detailed, outlining the restructuring of Shin Capital Group into a fully legitimate holding company. New compliance framework. New board composition. A charitable development arm focused on small business infrastructure in underserved urban districts. That last addition he included quietly, without annotation, and suspected that only one person in the world would understand exactly where it had come from. He submitted both letters before sunrise. By 9 a.m., the council knew. By noon, his lawyers had filed the restructuring paperwork. By 3 p.m., his mother had called 4 times. He answered on the fourth. She didn't shout. Shin Yuna had never shouted in her life. She spoke with the measured precision of a woman who had built her entire identity around composure, and beneath every word was something she would never name directly, not anger exactly, but the particular grief of a parent watching a child choose a life she hadn't written for him. He let her speak. All of it. Then he said, I know, Amma. I know. A long silence. Are you happy? She asked finally. The question seemed to cost her something. He thought about a rooftop. A patterned headband catching afternoon light. A woman who told him he was the problem and meant it as a compliment. I'm going to be, he said. His mother said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, don't be late for Sunday dinner. It was the closest she had ever come to a blessing. He found Noa on the corner at 4:47 p.m., later than her usual closing time. She was packing down the cart, moving through the end-of-day routine with the same methodical care she brought to everything, when she heard the car door and looked up. Not the plain sedan. Not the motorcade. He had walked. She looked at him for a moment, reading his face the way she always did, cataloging, assessing, looking for the thing beneath the surface. Whatever she found there made her set down the cup she was holding. It's done, she asked. It's done. She absorbed that. Looked at the cart. Looked back at him. You gave up a lot. I gave up a title, he said. There's a difference. She almost smiled. That almost smile that he had decided, somewhere around the third morning on this corner, was worth more than anything else he had ever been offered. He crossed the remaining distance between them and stood where he had stood that first morning, same pavement, same corner, same woman, except that nothing else was the same at all. He was not the man who had gripped her arm in traffic. She was not the obstacle his security detail had needed to clear. They were just two people on a street corner in Gangnam, standing close enough that the rest of the city felt very far away. Caleb's fees, he said. Next semester. Covered. Don't argue with me. I'm going to argue with you, she said immediately. I know. He reached out and straightened the patterned headband that had shifted slightly to one side, his fingers brief and careful. We'll figure it out. She looked up at him, not with the guarded wariness of their first meeting, not with the careful distance she had maintained for weeks, but directly. Fully. The way Noa Blackwood looked at everything she had decided to stop running from. Okay, she said simply. The cart stood between them, colorful and unassuming, catching the last of the afternoon light. Right where everything had started. There is a particular kind of courage that never makes the news. It doesn't arrive in motorcades. It doesn't sit at the head of long tables or sign documents that restructure empires. It doesn't get photographed or profiled or spoken about in council chambers by men with old money and older opinions. It shows up at 4:30 in the morning in a cold back room, in the dark, alone, and it starts cutting fruit. That is the courage nobody talks about. The kind that doesn't ask for an audience. The kind that keeps going not because anyone is watching, but because someone, is depending on it. Noa Blackwood didn't wake up every morning before sunrise because it was romantic. She did it because Caleb needed tuition and rent didn't negotiate, and dignity, she had decided, was non-negotiable regardless of what the work looked like from the outside. That is discipline. That is strategy. That is, if we are being precise about the language, a form of power, quiet and unflashy and entirely self-generated, which makes it the rarest kind of all. And yet the world had looked at her cart and seen an obstacle. The women who planted those heirlooms had looked at Noa and seen someone beneath consequence. Someone who could be removed like a piece moved off a board. They had status and family names and silk dresses and the kind of access that opens doors before you knock. And they had used every single advantage to destroy a woman who had harmed nobody, simply because her existence inconvenienced their ambitions. That is what status without character looks like. Not impressive. Not powerful. Desperate. Afraid. Reaching for harm because it cannot reach for anything higher. The fallacy of elite is not that it fails to produce capable people. It is that it sometimes produces people who confuse inherited advantage with earned worth, and that confusion, left unchallenged, becomes the most dangerous thing in any room. Jin had grown up inside that fallacy. He had been handed a name and told it was a self. He had been given a throne and told it was a destiny. And he had spent 34 years feeling the specific hollowness of a life assembled entirely from other people's expectations, powerful on every surface, starving underneath. It was a woman on a street corner who showed him the difference. Not through a speech. Not through a lesson. Simply by being exactly who she was in every circumstance, steady under pressure, honest under scrutiny, unbothered by his money and unintimidated by his name. Noa didn't see Shin Jinn the boss. She saw a man blocking traffic. And then she saw a man who was lonely. And then she saw a man who was trying, imperfectly and earnestly, to become something truer than what he had inherited. She looked past everything the world had draped over him and found the person underneath. That is cross-cultural empathy in its most essential form. Not a policy. Not a program. A choice, made in the middle of a busy intersection, repeated daily at a street corner, sustained through suspicion and sabotage and every force that insisted the distance between their worlds was too wide to cross honestly. They crossed it anyway. One cup of juice at a time. Here is what this story is really about, besties, underneath all the suits and the motorcades and the Mafia intrigue. It is about the people society steps over on its way to somewhere important. The vendors and the workers and the quiet ones building something real with their hands at hours when the powerful are still asleep. It is about the truth that character lives there, in the discipline, in the dignity, in the refusal to become small just because the world keeps suggesting you are. Real power is not what you can command. It is what you are willing to become when becoming costs you something. Noa knew that from the beginning. Jin just needed someone to stop his car long enough to learn it. And that, besties, is the end of our story. Thank you for watching Mafia Moonlight Tales. If this series moved you, please like, share, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. See you in the next one.